Well, hello again, boys and girls. Well, we've finished chapter 10, haven't we? Ooh. And Mr. Mousey has been up on the rigging, and suddenly he's been hit and he's knocked out again. And what has happened next? Well, that's where we come into the next couple of chapters. We're into chapter 11, and then we'll read chapter 12 because they're not too long together. Chapter 11, it's called Recovery. Light. White light made him blink. He tried to focus. Something was moving between the light and himself. Something fuzzy. Something getting closer. Now it was making a noise. There was something familiar about the noise, but he couldn't quite put a finger on it. Whatever it was had moved again. More light. The fuzzy object came back and made more noises. Then there was a coolness on his head. It felt nice. This was a peaceful place. Where was this place? Something urgent, however, was niggling at the back of his mind. There was something he had to do, but he couldn't think for the life of himself what it was. It bothered him that he couldn't think what it was. The light was warm on his face, and the fuzzy shape was close by. Again he felt the pleasant coolness. He decided to try to ignore the bothersome thoughts and enjoy the light, the coolness on his forehead, and the warmth on his face. Whatever it was could wait. Chapter 12. Breakfast. For 4 days Mr. Rabbit sat at Mr. Mousey's bed. Mr. Mousey was a very sick mouse. He had a fever and shivered a lot. Mr. Rabbit spent all his time attending to his sick friend, mopping his brow, tucking in his sheets, keeping the room at just the right temperature. Hardly an hour went by, but one of the parrots would call by to see if there was any improvement in the small creature. He had become quite a hero in the eyes of these rough crewmen, since he had more or less single-handedly saved all of their lives, and everyone hoped that he would pull through. It was only after the captain and Hasher the hamster had managed to put the vessel into the wind to ride out the remainder of the storm that anyone had been able to bring down the unconscious body of the little mouse. His head was cut from the blow from the wood that had knocked him out, but apart from that, the pure effort had sapped him completely, and there was little strength left in him to make a recovery. When the hurricane eventually passed, all the ship's hands got to work on repairs to the damage, and Mr. Rabbit was detailed to nurse the mouse. Not that he could have been stopped. "That there mouse is my best friend, and nothing nor nobody is going to keep me away from him, especially now he needs me," he declared to the whole group of pirates when they were talking about their sick guest. The rat captain had one of the cabins in the stern prepared, and the mouse carefully taken down. Food was brought in at meal times, and although he didn't eat much, Mr. Rabbit was impressed with the pirates, whom he had first thought as only a bunch of cutthroats. On the 5th day, Mr. Mousey opened his eyes and spoke. "Oh, my head. Is that you, Mr. Rabbit? Are you okay?" "Mr. Mousey, you're awake! Thank goodness! We were beginning to think you were going to..." He altered his tone to sound brighter. "Well, never mind now. You're going to be as fit as a trombone, or is that as fit as a drum? Or whatever it is. Anyway, hello, it's good to see you again." Mr. Mousey smiled. "Fit as a fiddle. And who's the we, you mean? And where am I? I've had such strange dreams. Pirate ships, storms, and all sorts." He looked up at his friend. "And it's good to see you too, pal." Now Mr. Rabbit wasn't sure how much Mr. Mousey had forgotten, and when he questioned him, found that the last clear memory he had was flying over the sea the night before Mr. Rabbit fell off the carpet. "Oh, wow! Ha, I see I'm going to have to remind you of a lot," he said, whistling under his breath. "Well, first of all, you are in bed in a ship, and it's a pirate ship, and it's full of pirates." And so it went. As he told the story, most of it came back to Mr. Mousey every now and again, and he would stop the rabbit to double check some detail or other. "So, you say the pirates haven't tried to harm us in any way?" he asked at one point. This only drew a laugh from his friend. "Harm us? I should think not. Why, we're heroes, Mr. Mousey." Well, you're a hero. I'm sort of a mini hero. Well, maybe a mini one, he thought for a minute. Well, actually, I'm not a hero at all, but never mind, you're enough for the both of us. Mr. Mousey laughed. His head still hurt, but he had another question. "So, where exactly in the ship is this room?" "At the back somewhere," replied his friend. "Why?" "Only because I think it was at the back I first entered the boat, and I think, if I remember, I hid the carpet and our things in the room I came in at. I don't think this is it, though." Mr. Rabbit only shook his head. "There are other rooms, but to be honest, I haven't really had time to see much else of the ship." His face suddenly flushed a little when he said this, and Mr. Mousey realised his pal had probably spent all of his time looking after him. "How long have I been sick?" he asked. "Well, this is the first time you've woken in 5 days," replied the rabbit. You mean you've been looking after me in this room for 5 days? Mr. Rabbit, you are a hero. Thank you so much. What could I ever do without you?" The rabbit looked flustered as he tried to shrug it off. "Oh, it was nothing. He was interrupted by a knock at the door. A black, two-pointed hat appeared as the door opened, followed by the head holding it up. A one-eyed head. At least there was a patch over its left eye, so Mr. Mousey took it that the creature looking in was missing it. "Well, how's our hero this morning, matey?" It was the rat captain. "Oh, good morning, Captain, sir," replied the rabbit. "Actually, Mr. Mousey's just woken up, and I think he's going to be back to normal in no time." The captain came right into the room. "Har, that's what I like to hear. Well, you're a turn-up for the books, and no mistake," he said, taking a keen interest in the mouse now sitting up in the bed. "A lot of lads has been asking how he's doing, and I says I'll just take a look in, and look at he. Here he is, near as right as rain." The captain wondered what the rabbit wondered what was so right about rain. He felt he had seen enough rain recently to last a lifetime, but he didn't say anything. Mr. Mousey looked at the rat before him. He was indeed a rough-looking sort of a fellow, just as his friend had said, but there was something deeper than his tough outside appearance, something sort of honest or real. He felt straight away that he was a person that would not have any hidden ways about him. What you saw was what you would get. "Yes, indeed," he said to the rat, "and thank you all for what you've done for me and my friend. If you hadn't pulled him out of the water when you did, it might have been a lot worse." "Wasn't doing a particular good impression of a fish when we got him, that's for sure," he laughed. "But as for all the thanks, you're the one as deserves all that stuff. If it weren't for he, we'd have been doing very bad fish impressions, or more likely, very good fish impressions." He chuckled coarsely at his own joke, and then looked suddenly very serious. "Look here. There's a lot of things as I don't quite understand about thee both." He looked at Mr. Rabbit. "Like, how did he ever get in the middle of an ocean with no other boat in sight? Turning to Mr. Mousey, he continued, "And where he came from is only a mystery and no mistake." He paused only briefly before carrying on. "But these may be things as he wants to keep to yourselves, and that's fine by me, and I'll ask no more about it. What is needn't saying is this, though." He looked with a serious and purposeful gaze at Mr. Mousey. "You rescued us all, Mouse. We was going down, I was a-fighting it, but I knew it well enough. What he did up in the mainmast I have never seen in all my life as a sailor. I'd hardly as believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own 2 eyes, well, 1 eye, I mean," he added, smiling. "But we owes our lives to ye, and that's not a thing us pirates forget easy. Whatever he does, and whatever he goes, he's got friends, and as I'll never let he down, and that is a promise." His speech over, he looked relieved to be able to go on to more day-to-day things. "Well, breakfast's up in the galley, and if he feels well enough, he's both welcome to come and join us in our simple meal." Mr. Rabbit just about managed to hold off jumping up and down and racing out the door at these words. He had eaten very little in the past few days, and now that his friend was out of danger, his stomach was able to make itself known in no uncertain terms. "Thank you very much, Captain. That would be really nice," replied Mr. Mousey. "How about you, Mr. Rabbit? Would you like that all right?" He grinned at his friend, knowing quite well how he would be thinking. Mr. Rabbit found it difficult not to run along the passageway, and in fact, since he had no idea where the galley was, had to follow along behind the captain, with Mr. Mousey managing remarkably well after having been so ill. After 20 or 30 feet, the smell from the galley would have led him by pure nose work. In any case, the delicious aroma of bacon and eggs, toast and tea floated out into the passageway and directed them into a long, lamp-lit room. At the far end were 2 windows which opened out to the air, and this, with the lamps, brought enough light in to show the details of the room. The rich panelled walls had many oil paintings, mainly of proud-looking sailors or ships with full sails spread. Here and there between the paintings were the lamp holders, ornate brass affairs fashioned in the shape of dolphins. The centre of the room was taken up with 2 massive and very long tables laid out parallel to each other. Around these sat most of the ship's crew. The rest had to look after the ship as she sailed along. As soon as the captain entered, everyone kicked back their chairs and stood up. When they spotted Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit, their faces curled into wide grins, and without hesitation, they all broke into wild clapping. Every face was turned in their direction. Well, that is, almost every face. Mr. Mousey noticed a leather-jacketed beaver at the bottom of one of the tables, looking in quite another direction altogether. Actually, just where he was looking was sort of hard to work out, since one of his eyes was looking all over the place at the same time. Quite a feat. From the end of the right-hand table, a skinny squirrel stepped forward. If there was ever a competition for scruffiness or general grubby appearance, here was a sure winner, and no mistake. It took a red scarf off its head and gave a low bow. Replacing the grimy scarf, it asked permission of the captain to speak, and being granted, addressed the 2 friends. "Being senior sailor here, I would like to say, for all of us," he swung his arm around the room in a manner which he supposed to be tremendously gracious, "thanks for saving our necks." "Some of which needs a good scrubbing," interrupted a grinning ferret from the opposite table. The squirrel gave the ferret a sharp look and continued, "And we would like us to offer our hand of friendship." Again he was interrupted. "What also could do with a bit of soap and water." This time the voice came from further down the table. The squirrel glared with a frown down the row. "Oh, And I suppose, like, yous as never knows what water even looks like, pig nose. Well, the creature he was addressing didn't seem to take offence at the name he was called, largely due to the fact he did have a nose like a pig, and in any case was actually called Pig Nose. What sort of a creature the snout-nosed animal was, however, Mr. Mousey couldn't quite say. In fact, there were quite a few creatures assembled around the table he had trouble identifying. "As I was saying," resumed the squirrel, looking threateningly at the others at his table, "we considers you as one of us. Pirates is a band of brothers, a faithful and true bunch of shipmates, sticking by each other in trouble, always ready to help out and lend a hand or a leg," came a chortle as a wooden leg landed with a thud on the table in front of him. "Right, that's it," shouted the squirrel, whose temper didn't normally stretch even this far. He angrily grabbed the wooden leg and bounced it off the head of the hamster sitting beside him. "Aye," replied the hamster, whose name was Hasher. "What was that for? Here, let me lend you a hand." He turned and stuck a furry fist into the squirrel's stomach. This seemed to be taken as a signal by the remainder of the pirates, who immediately leapt to their feet and set upon one another with fists, teeth, elbows, and various other body parts. Within seconds, the whole galley was in uproar, with chairs flying and plates spinning across the room. "Arr, good bunch of lads," said the rat captain, nodding at the scene before them. "Feel free to join in if you like." Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit just looked at one another in stunned amazement. For a bunch of faithful and true shipmates, well, they had a funny way of showing it. A good number of pieces of toast lay at Mr. Rabbit's feet where they had landed, and never being the one to see good food go to waste, he picked them up and began to stuff them into his mouth. "Bit cold, but otherwise okay," he mumbled, his mouth full. Well, since by now most of the pirates were rolling about on the floor in a mass wrestle-cum-boxing match, he found a seat on the right-hand table beside a tray of bacon and eggs and got to more serious work. The captain seemed more impressed by this than anything else going on in the room. "Blow me, if we ever needs to win a battle by out-eating the enemy, I guess we's got a champion there, and no mistake." Little Mouse merely smiled and nodded his head slowly in agreement. "Maybe you should just calm your crew down before Mr. Rabbit finishes off everyone else's breakfast. Besides, if they're that lively every day, they're going to need the energy." Well, it took a while, but eventually the captain restored order, mainly by wading into the fray and bashing all around him with a leg off a broken chair. It seemed of little importance to him who he hit. It seemed to be a method, however, that worked, for after a while the crew made their way back to their places. The general attitude seemed to be friendly enough, even jolly. No one entering the room at that moment would have guessed he had just missed the apparent practice and warm-up session for a good-sized major war. Mr. Rabbit, sitting 2 or 3 places down on the outside of the right-hand table, had yet to raise his head, not seeming to be aware of the return to order. As far as he was concerned, he had an important task before him, and it was taking up a good bit of his concentration. Concentration that he had no care to waste on less trivial matters. The captain sat at the head of the right table with the mouse to his left. After a short time, everyone found themselves back to the business in hand, and the remainder of breakfast time passed with friendly chat over tea and toast. During this time, Mr. Mousey got to know the names of some of the sailors around him. The squirrel who had attempted to make the welcome speech was called Digger. He was indeed a greasy-looking creature, and this is probably why his mates had made fun of his appearance. Hasher was first mate, and was the captain's right-hand man, or rather hamster. The pirate called Pig Nose said he was a gopher, and he liked his nose that way. "I was the smallest in a family of 12, he explained, and always had to fight my way through my brothers and sisters to get anything. They used to push me back all the time, and it kind of squished my nose, but I like it. Makes me look tough. Well, Mr. Mousey thought it made him look like a gopher with a squished nose, but then, how many of those do you get to see anyway? He had already decided he liked pig nose. As he looked around the room, suddenly he felt a rough face brush up against his own from behind his left shoulder. A voice whispered loudly in his ear, so loudly in fact, it made him jump. "Ah, be a good lad there, Digger. Which one's the mousy fellow? Not that I can't see him or nothing. I can see him well enough, you understand, but just in case I misses the wee boy Owen, and just in case, which one is him?" Just then Mr. Rabbit looked across and saw the beaver whispering in Mr. Mousey's ear. "Noggin! Hello! I see you've met Mr. Mousey then." The beaver started, but quickly settled himself. "Oh yes, old Nogger knew him as soon as he seed him. I was just saying, Mr. Mousey," he continued in the mouse's ear, "I was just saying, nice to meet you, young fella. Do you know you look like a squirrel?" Mr. Mousey had turned to face Nogger now, although just where he was facing was hard to know. His eyes occasionally looked straight at the mouse, but Mr. Mousey felt that was as much by accident as anything else. Standing up, Mr. Mousey gave Nogger a small bow and took his hand. Mr. Mousey could see that the beaver was very sensitive about his eyesight, or rather the lack of it, and he didn't want to embarrass him any further. "Good to meet you, Nogger. My friend tells me you are a difficult sailor to escape from." "Oh, told he, did he? Ah, yes, well, old Nogger's not so slow as some count slow. I'm a parrot, he knows. Tough as old shoe leather, hard as iron, eyes like eagles." Here he struck a pose and tried to look all those three things at the same time. However, with the face he pulled and the shape he stood to accomplish this, he looked more like he really needed to go to the bathroom. He held this pose for a good 10 seconds to make sure Mr. Mousey got the idea, and then he suddenly relaxed. He bent down and whispered in the mouse's ear. Did the rabbity boy say out else about old Nogger, Like any kind of a secret thing, you know, Here he whispered, very quietly indeed, looking up and down the room as he did so, though what he might have seen that was any use to him was anyone's guess. No, at least if he did, it was certainly nothing that I would be repeating to anyone, Nogger. The beaver took a few moments in which he seemed to be considering what the mouse had just said. He nodded his head in a satisfied sort of a way. "Good lad," he whispered. "He seems a right decent sort of a mouse. Pity he be in such bad company now." He gave a hearty laugh and slapped Mr. Mousey equally heartily on the back, or at least he meant to. In fact, his hearty slap heartily missed its target altogether, and his arm swung vigorously over Mr. Mousey's head and headed back in the direction of the beaver himself. This action had the effect of causing Nogger to lose his balance as his body followed the swing of the arm, and he went into an anti-clockwise pirouette. He landed heavily on the table and rolled onto the plate of Digger the squirrel, who was sitting beside Mr. Rabbit. "Get off my breakfast, you great lump!" he hollered at the beaver and promptly poked him with his fork. Unfortunately, this was taken by all as another good reason to start that morning's second brawling match. Sitting at the head of the table, the captain merely laughed and carried on with his breakfast. "You know, I really don't think he meant to do that, Captain," shouted Mr. Mousey over the din. Mumbled the captain. "Do what?" "Well, fall all over all over Digger's breakfast. He just lost his balance trying to slap me on the back." "Oh, never worry about that. The old boy's as blind as a bat. Thinks nobody knows. He has a secret. We'll chuck him off the boat if we discovers his secret. So nobody lets on. It's okay. The lad is just making sure he doesn't suspect we know. Tender-hearted bunch of lads, really. Well, Mr. Mousey realised he had a lot to learn about pirates, and he hoped none of them ever felt too tender-hearted towards himself or Mr. Rabbit. Well, that was the end of chapter 11 and chapter 12. We've met the pirates. They're a rough bunch, but I don't think they're a bad bunch. In fact, I think they're a decent enough sort, really. Just shows you you can't really tell people by first appearances. Sure you can. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that chapter. The next chapter, where we find out a little bit about life at sea. And so I'll go now. Until next time, and you take care. God bless. Bye-bye, boys and girls.